Finally, Ferdinand Waititu has been released after Rigathi Gachagua abandoned him. Welcome to Kenya Lens Media, where we give you news updates as they break. Now, the former Kiambu Governor Ferdinand Waititu has secured temporary relief after the High Court reduced his bail to 20 million shillings as he awaits the determination of his appeal, marking a significant development in one of the Kenya's closely watched corruption-related cases. In a ruling delivered on February 18, 2026, Justice Winfrida Okwany allowed Waititu's release on either 20 million shilling cash or other cash bail or two sureties backed by properties valued at not less than 30 million each. However, the court directed that the deputy registrar must verify and approve the proposed securities before the former governor can benefit from the revised terms. The decision comes after months of legal contest over the Waititu's lawyers, Waititu's lawyers described as overly restrictive bail conditions, setting the stage for continued courtroom battles as the appeal process unfolds. At the heart of the High Court's decision was the question of whether the initial bail terms remained reasonable under the circumstances. Waititu's defense team argued that the early requirement of 53.5 million bank guarantee had proven practically unattainable despite sustained efforts to comply. According to court submissions, more than 7 months had passed since the original ruling, and during which the former governor consistently attended all scheduled court sessions. His lawyers framed this record as clear evidence that it does not pose a flight risk. Legal analysts also say Kenyan courts often consider compliance history when reviewing bail terms, especially in high-profile economic crimes where the accused remains within the court's reach. By lowering the bail while maintaining strict verification requirements, the court appeared to strike a balance between the constitutional right to reasonable bail and the public interest in securing the accused's attendance. Waititu's legal team built its case around the central arguments, and that is demonstrated compliance and practical difficulty. They told the court that the former governor had shown respect for judicial authority by appearing at every hearing without fail. The defense further argued that the bail conditions must remain proportionate and realistic. In their view, a requirement that cannot reasonably be met effectively amounts to a denial of bail, which would conflict with the constitutional principles. Observers note that this line of argument reflects a broader trend in Kenyan jurisprudence, where courts increasingly scrutinize whether bail terms are punitive rather than merely precautionary. The Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions, represented by Counsel Mwamburi, strongly opposed the application, and prosecutors argued that the defense had failed to meet the legal threshold required to justify altering the earlier bail conditions. According to the state, the application did not present new or compelling evidence that could warrant judicial reconsideration. Mwamburi also pointed to what prosecution described as inconsistencies in the defense's position regarding the proposed bail figures. The prosecution told the court that the defense had initially suggested a specific amount, later withdrawn it, and then reintroduced it during the review process. Moves the state framed as procedural instability. Legal experts say such objections are common in high-stakes cases where prosecutors seek to maintain stringent conditions to minimize any perceived risk of interference with the judicial process. While granting the bail variation, the High Court introduced new protective measures. Most notably, Waititu must surrender his passport to the court and remain without travel documents until the appeal is fully determined. This condition is widely interpreted as the court's effort to neutralize any concerns about possible flight risk while still honoring the constitutional principle that bail should not be excessive. Courts in Kenya frequently use passport surrender as a middle ground safeguard in cases involving prominent figures or substantial financial allegations. By combined reduced bail with the tighter movement controls, the ruling reflects a cautious judicial approach. Waititu's case continues to attract national attention due to both his political prominence and the broader anti-corruption narrative in Kenya. As a former county boss from the politically influential Mount Kenya region, his legal battles carry implications beyond the courtroom. Political observers note that developments in corruption cases involving senior leaders often shape public perceptions of the government's commitment to accountability. The High Court's decision does not determine Waititu's guilt or innocence. Instead, it addresses the narrower procedural issue of whether bail terms should be adjusted while the appeal proceeds. Still, in Kenya's charged political environment, even procedural rulings can carry symbolic weight. The appeal Waititu is pursuing is ultimately determine whether the earlier findings against him stand, and during this interim period, the court must balance competing constitutional interests, the presumption of innocence, the right to reasonable bail, and the integrity of the judicial process. Legal scholars emphasize that bail variations does not weaken the underlying case. Rather, it reflects the court's ongoing supervisory role over the pre-trial and the post-conviction conditions. The deputy registrar's pending verification of sureties remain critical step, and if the proposed properties fail to meet the court standards, Waititu could remain in custody despite the favoring ruling. Kenyan courts have over the past decade gradually redefined their approach to bail high-profile corruption and economic crime cases. The 2010 Constitution established bail as a right unless compelling reasons justify denial. However, what qualifies as reasonable bail has remained a contested legal question, particularly in cases involving large financial sums or influential defendants. The Waititu ruling fits within the evolving jurisprudence, illustrating how courts attempt to calibrate conditions rather than impose absolute positions. The High Court's decision to reduce Ferdinand Waititu's bail highlights the delicate balance Kenya's judiciary must maintain between protecting constitutional rights and safeguarding the integrity of corruption prosecutions. For the accused, the ruling offers temporary relief and reinforces the principle that bail conditions must remain attainable and fair. For prosecutors and anti-corruption advocates, the added safeguards, particularly the passport surrender, signal that the court remains alert to potential risks. More broadly, the case underscores the growing maturity of Kenya's legal system, where even politically sensitive matters are increasingly resolved through procedural scrutiny rather than political pressure. As the appeal process moves forward, the ultimate outcome will test both the strength of the prosecution's case and the judiciary's commitment to due process. Regardless of the final verdict, the handling of Waititu's bail application has already become an important reference in Kenya's ongoing debate of accountability, fairness, and the rule of law. In a political environment where public trust is an institution, or rather institutions remain closely watched, how the courts manage high-profile corruption cases will continue to shape confidence in Kenya's justice system and, by extension, the country's democratic credibility. That is all for today from Kenya Lens Media, where we bring you news updates as they break. And if you're new here, consider subscribing.